Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here is your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Conservative, not bitter indeed, my friends. It is an absolute pleasure to be here with you on this, Tuesday morning, my friends. By the way, I should tell you here off the top that we will be out of the office next week, getting a little bit of a getaway. No matter what you say, it's much deserved, my friends. A little getaway here. You will be treated to some guest hosts next week. Including Gary Varvel, Chris Dunham, my friends, and I appreciate you letting me have a little bit of time away from the microphone. Today, I want to get into several things. Number one, I want to play a clip from an interview that happened this weekend between Kristen Welker. She had Todd Blanche, the new Attorney General, on her program, talking with him about basically whether or not he would be loyal to Trump or someone who would actually enforce the law, which is rich coming from these folks like Kristen Welker. But we'll talk a little bit about that, the role of the Attorney General, what this means, and so forth. Want to also spend some time talking about Governor Andy Beshear, governor of Kentucky, who has called for a so-called moderate Democrat, if there is such a thing anymore, who is calling for the end of the Electoral College. And then we've got some updates on the WNBA. Sophie Cunningham, of course, has caused a lot of controversy for standing up for truth. And there are fans that are coming out of the woodwork to support her and to make it known that women's basketball should shockingly be for women. And people are wearing XXXY chromosomes to WNBA games. A couple of fans at the Indiana Fever Atlanta Dream game a couple of days ago over, Sunday, I believe, wore an XXXY chromosome t-shirt, and they were told to cover that t-shirt. They were visible, I believe, on nationwide. They were down close to the court and visible on television. So I want to talk about that, my friends, as well. So that's where we're headed today, my friends. If you want the entire story, if you don't want to miss any of our content, if you want to get access to other things that we have to say that I simply don't have time for on this program, if you want links to the stack of stuff so you can read the articles that have fueled the conversation on this program, you should join the Inner Circle. It is totally free. You can cancel anytime. All you have to do is text the word JOIN to 317-785-1030, 317-785-1030. With that being said, let's get started here today, my friends. Attorney General Todd Blanche joined Meet the Press with Kristen Welker over the weekend, talking about his new role, talking about the role of the Attorney General, whether or not he would be loyal to Trump or someone who would be, someone who would be interested in the law itself and actually defending the law, prosecuting lawbreakers, and so forth. I love how this is framed, by the way. It's you either support Trump or you support lawlessness, is really what she's saying here. And of course, the left believes this. The left believes this completely. Meanwhile, we have a country that's in complete disarray from the very same people who they think they have the moral high ground, or they want you to think and me to think they have the moral high ground, but they don't. These are the people who've been tearing America apart at the seams. These are the people, the left, the media, who have kept hidden from you some of the problems we have in this country today. Remember when Biden was president, they assured us that the border crisis wasn't really a crisis at all. Illegal immigration really wasn't that big of a problem. Nothing to really be concerned with. The problems, the degree to which that Americans were upset about this, that was, they said, blown out of proportion. Of course, that was not the case at all. We had effectively completely wide open borders during Biden's administration. And there's any number of reasons to believe, to point to as to why this was the case. You could say that this was, of course, all about getting illegal votes, bodies to come in that simply could take advantage of all of these registrations to vote that are not. Look, there's no voter ID, there's no enforcement. You may have seen recently the undercover journalism done by James O'Keefe and Carl Higbee and others who went to Michigan to expose the insanity there, where people were coming in full burqas, and there's apparently a law on the books in Michigan that says that one person can vouch for the identity of up to 8 other people. If they're in the same precinct they're in, they can go to the polls. There's no need to have a voter ID. You basically say this person is, whoever, Steve Smith, or in the case of the undercover journalism, it was Muhammad and so forth, because they had, they were covered, as with burqas and so forth. This is, whatever person, and you say, I vouch for this person's identity, and then they let you in to go vote. Of course, what could possibly go wrong with this system? This is Steve here. I can vouch that Steve lives in my district, and the poll workers say, oh, that's great. Let's let him in to go vote. This is insanity. They've exposed this stuff. I mean, you don't have to be some sort of a critical thinker to understand open borders with that kind of thing right there happening creates all sorts of opportunities for voter fraud, election fraud, and so forth. It's unbelievable how people refuse to accept what's right there before their very eyes. In fact, when the internet became a thing, and I'm old enough for this to remember this, there was a time when I thought, because back then our battle was against the legacy media, right? The mainstream media, NBC, CBS, ABC, the New York Post, not the New York Post so much, the New York Times, the Washington Times, the Washington Post, I should say, LA Times, all of these liberal outlets, all these leftist outlets and so forth. And my thinking at the time was, once we have the ability to get information out, other points of view that are not controlled by the media narrative complex, where the narratives were controlled. In fact, you would watch the evening news back in the day, and it's still probably the case today. I don't do that any longer. But you'd watch the evening news, and whether you turned on ABC, CBS, read the New York Times the next morning, whatever, it was the same exact thing. Rush used to talk about this, the late, great Rush Limbaugh. If you missed NBC Nightly News, not to worry, turn it over to ABC. You missed ABC, no worries, turn it over to CBS. If you missed CBS, don't worry about that either. Pick up a copy of the New York Times tomorrow. You didn't get that, get the LA Times, and so on and so forth. And it was the truth. In fact, there were many instances where Rush would put together montages of journalists, make-believe journalists actually, saying virtually the same exact thing, using the same exact verbiage, the same exact wording when they would give their news reports for the day. My favorite was the term gravitas. When George W. Bush selected Dick Cheney as his running mate in 2000, every single journalist, I kid you not, was talking about how that ticket lacked in gravitas. Ask yourself how many times you've ever heard the term gravitas uttered on a news program or by guests on a news program. Ask yourself how many times you heard that. If outside of this particular example, I don't know that I've ever heard it. Maybe once or twice. But during that particular time, it was completely in vogue for the term of the day to be gravitas. And I bet you heard that term hundreds, if not thousands of times during discussions about that particular ticket, Bush Cheney lacking in gravitas. And so I thought when the internet began to gain steam and there were bloggers and podcasting became a thing, I thought finally we were going to cut through and be able to reach people for truth. We could get people to see that there are, that there's other news out there or other ways of looking at events that the media had been hiding and denying and colluding with one another to present a narrative that, of course, always went along with the political wishes of the Democrat Party. It always favored the Democrats. And I thought, here is finally our solution. But in reality, what ended up happening, and there's a lot of things that ended up happening. There were people who just got overwhelmed with the sources. There were people who never paid attention because they have had it basically beaten into their brains that the people you trust are the people at these well-established and very prestigious networks and news outlets and so forth. When someone like you or I would look at that and say, these folks have violated our trust in every imaginable way, we don't trust these folks at all. And interestingly enough, when you do polling, you'll find that most people have a strong distrust for the media. But it's interesting what they conclude. Some people just completely abdicate their thinking. They think that people are lying about the media being the liars, and so they're going to listen to them regardless. You've got some people who say there's way too much to sift through. There's way too much to stay on top of. And so they'll listen to maybe new voices, but sometimes new, more radical voices. Voices like Hassan Piker, the lunatic leftist podcaster, which again, listen, free country, listen to who you want to listen to. But if you want to listen to truth, if you want to listen to the ideas that are rooted in goodness and truth and reality and our constitutional heritage and what made this country great, you better not tune into places like that, at least thinking you're going to get information and news and perspective that aligns with those things, because you absolutely will not. So you've got that happening. And I think some people really just have shut down. They've shut down and they just want to go along with whoever is in, well, kind of power, the people sitting behind the desks, the narrative of the day. And right now, you know the narrative of the day. It's the way of the world, my friends. The way of the world is deception and lying and all sorts of evil things that promote the LGBTQIA plus agenda, the pro-abortion agenda, the pro-communist, pro-Marxist agenda. Those are the voices. Those are the worldly voices. Those are the anti-God voices out there today, and it attracts people for many reasons. And so now we have a scenario where some people, they constantly malign and attack conservatives, calling people like me fascists and everything you can imagine. If you want to know what some of those are, just simply go to our Facebook page and read some of the comments. I bet I read 1/100% of the comments. And we've got tools that if I want to search for certain types of things, I can do that. But I don't read the comments. But I hear from a lot of angry leftists. I do know that, just from what I can see and what I do know. But anyway, they're angry. They are upset. They want to remake this country. And now they're openly calling for ways to remake this country. And they're attacking anybody. Listen, anybody who says they're a conservative, anybody who says they're a Republican, anybody who's ever voted for Trump, you, my friend, if you fall into those categories, you are the devil to them. You are evil to them. You need to be stopped at all costs. It doesn't matter if they take away your right to free speech. It doesn't matter if they attack you personally, if they harm your business or your career, if they lie about you. They believe they're justified in any of this because they believe, or they have been led to believe, brainwashed to believe, that you are a fascist and you are trying to empower Donald Trump to be dictator of the United States of America. And of course, none of that is even remotely true, but that's where we find ourselves today. And that's what leads us here to Todd Blanche becoming the Attorney General, sits down with Kristen Welker here. And I want you to listen to this exchange where she begins to press him on whether or not he can act independently of the White House. And here is how that exchange went.
Here in person, as we just heard in your address to the Justice Department staff this week, you said you and DOJ will, quote, uphold the law without fear or favor. You, of course, used to be President Trump's former personal defense attorney. Can you pledge that the Justice Department will always act independently of the White House?
Well, there's a big difference between saying we will always do our job and investigate any case and act independently of the White House. No, I'm not going to pledge that, and no attorney general should ever pledge that. The president,
that's right.
I mean, if I were to pledge, I will be independent of the White House. What that means is that if President Trump says, I want the Department of Justice to go after every violent criminal in this country, which is what he has said, what you're saying to me is I just say, no, sir, I'm not going to do it. So I will act with integrity. Our prosecutors will act with integrity. We will prosecute without fear or any sort of favor. And that's exactly what we've been doing. And that's what every Department of Justice should do.
Well, I guess big picture, if the president asks you to do something that you feel crosses an ethical or legal line, would you do it?
The president will never ask me to do something unethical or legal or illegal. He never has. He never will. And no, I swore to the Constitution of the United States, like every cabinet secretary has done, and like every attorney general before me has done. And so this narrative that's mostly pushed by the left and pushed by the media, that the president's going to pull me aside and ask me to do something illegal, is completely a false narrative, not true, will not happen, and hasn't happened.
Here in person, as we just
There you go. I have a question for Kristen Welker here. Who does she think? Who does she think the Attorney General, what branch of government does she think it's under? Listen, I understand. I am under no illusion here that that people think that the Department of Justice is somehow separate from the executive branch. I understand. And I understand even the thinking here. The thinking is, look, you can't have a Department of Justice that doesn't do anything to stop the President of the United States from just acting illegally. I understand where that comes from, right? This whole concept that says nobody is above the law. Well, the problem is when you have someone who's president, the president is head of the executive branch, which is responsible for enforcing the law. Now, a lot of people say the Attorney General is the chief law enforcement officer. I would say technically it's the President of the United States. And it is a peculiar position to have. And it's one that, listen, can certainly be, the limits can be pushed and the powers can be abused. There are mechanisms in place to try to prevent these things from happening, but it gets complicated. And there are people who believe that the Attorney General should be separate from the White House, from the executive branch, because of these very things. Because they want to be, they want to hold on to this, I would say, illusion or delusion that says the Attorney General can somehow be this unbiased member, I guess, of a fourth branch of government. The Attorney General is under the executive branch. The Attorney General is going to, he has a job to do, and his job, of course, is to enforce the law fairly, without political bias, without getting us into lawfare, as we call it, using political warfare when applying the law, going after your political opponents to try to find a way to ensnare them in the law, to prosecute them. Basically what happened to Trump. And that's the great irony here, is that Trump is painted in these liberal news outlets like CBS there with Kristen Welker as a person who believes he is above the law, as a person who will use the law to inappropriately target his political enemies. As I've said before, nuance is required and understanding and context is required when navigating these issues. Of course, you should never go after your political opponents to try to catch them in breaking the law or trumping up charges, no pun intended there, to go after them because they're your political opponents. That is a terrible thing. That is bad for a republic like ours. That's bad for a free society. That's when really bad things can happen. You certainly should not do that. But as I've said before, if someone who happens to be on the other side of the political aisle has broken the law, that doesn't mean that you should refuse to prosecute them simply because they are on the other side of the political aisle, my friends. And that's what's happened. It's so fascinating how that happens. When Republicans are in power, we're told that we can't abuse power, and we can't, and we shouldn't. But that's where the emphasis is. Make sure Trump doesn't abuse his power and go after his political enemies. Well, what happens if his political enemies have literally broken the law? When it's not some see what you can find witch hunt thing happening here. Instead, it is simply enforcing the law when these folks have clearly and repeatedly, in some cases, broken the law, arguably, potentially. Should they not be allowed to do that? It works both ways. It cuts both ways. But they only present it from one angle when each side is in political power. When Democrats are in power, of course, if they go after their political opponents, they're justified. Trump, they were justified in going after Trump. They weren't, but from the media's narrative and perspective, of course they were. And so we get to a place like this. And of course, his job, Attorney General Todd Blanche's job, is to enforce the law, not to break the law. But he's also under the President of the United States. He's not in some fourth branch of government. This is a delusion. It doesn't work this way, my friends. The founders crafted this situation, this form of government very deliberately, and we're the ones that are responsible. We're the ones that are supposed to hold these folks responsible for what they do, politically speaking, as I'm getting here to the end of this first hour. So I just wanted to share that with you. We'll shift gears as we move into the next segment. But friends, let's face it, living with discomfort is tough. And while prescription medications can help, they often come with a long list of side effects, not to mention the risk of dependency. That's why more people are exploring natural options like Kratom from Christopher's Organic Botanicals. It's a family-run company. They do things the right way. They work directly with the farmers in Indonesia. They lab test every batch, my friends, that they receive before it goes to market and gets into your hands. There's no synthetics, no chemicals, no surprises, just honest natural Kratom that's been used for generations. You can start with their Kratom Starter Pack. Discount code Todd Huff will save you 10% on your first order. Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. That's Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Truth, tradition, transparency, and yes, time out for me. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. We're going to talk in this segment about an interview that Kentucky Governor, Democrat Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear had with Face the Nation, CBS as well, over the weekend, calling for the end of the Electoral College. So that's where I want to get to next. I think this is an important conversation to have, my friends, and so that's what we're going to do. But before we do that, ever notice how some families seem to have a plan that lasts for generations? That's not by accident, my friends. Full Suite Wealth works with people who want their wealth to make a difference for years to come, and they bring together high-level investment strategies like private equity, private credit, and option strategies. All those things coupled with expert legal guidance. It's about making sure your vision becomes a reality for the people you love today and in the future. If you're looking to do more than just manage your money, you want to leave your mark and build something lasting, take a look at FullSuiteWealth.com. That's the website, FullSuiteWealth.com. FullSuiteWealth.com. Build your legacy. Secure your future. Okay, so let's talk here a little bit. Well, I guess we'll start by playing this soundbite. So Andy Beshear, Democrat governor in a conservative state. And it's mind-boggling to me that this is where we find ourselves today, where Kentucky would vote for a Democrat governor. These folks pretend to be centrist or moderate or conservative. Right now, there are no people on the national stage that are conservative Democrats. I would welcome them to the conversation. I wish that we were in the era where there were blue dog Democrats. But I'll tell you, the Obamacare vote back in 2010 killed the blue dog Democrat. And candidly, the Democrat Party abandoned the blue dog Democrat, the Union Democrat, and went with the radical leftist as the core, the base of their political party. I've shared this before, I was raised in a Union Democrat home. I was raised in what I would call a blue dog Democrat, a conservative Democrat home, a Union Democrat home. My upbringing was not by radical leftists or even liberals. My upbringing, I grew up in a home that was Democrat. My dad was Democrat because he was in the Union. He feared what Republicans were going to do. He thought to the working man, and he sided with Democrats politically, but he's not a liberal. He thought some of the stuff they were doing, he didn't obviously agree with, but the Democrat Party abandoned people like my dad, like you. If you're a blue dog Democrat, if you're a Union Democrat, you have no home. You don't? Well, you do. It's just that it's hard to believe that you do because it's in the Republican Party. You have infinitely more in common with me than you do with the people leading your party today. And that is the truth. And I welcome you here. I'm not here to demonize you. I'm here to persuade you and to extend an olive branch here, my friends, in peace. I want people who don't agree with me to tune in and listen to this program. Some people don't want that to be the case. In fact, that's what we'll be talking about briefly in the final segment of the show. But right now, let's keep it focused on Andy Beshear. Andy Beshear, while he wants you to believe he's some moderate Democrat, he is fueled by the same leftist rhetoric. He has to be able to appeal to these people on the left. They are the base of his party. And so he's a make-believe conservative Democrat. Again, there are none of these folks. No one is a real conservative Democrat that is elected on the national stage. They simply don't exist anymore. So he's on this program talking about the upcoming election, and he's asked to talk about what his biggest idea is heading into the midterm elections, and he has this to say.
It's about is given they're looking for big ideas, what would be your biggest, boldest idea that you're promoting these days?
Well, I'll give you two, because people want you to fix the darn economy, and they want you to fix the darn government.
Can I stop there? This, to me, Democrats are notorious for this. They're notorious for this, and it drives me insane. As someone, I believe authenticity. Listen, you may not like a lot about this program if you're someone on the left of the aisle. That's fine. I don't know why you wouldn't, but let's just grant you that for a moment. But I will tell you this. I just come on here and I talk like myself. I don't try to change my accent. I might if I'm making a point to mock these folks. But you remember Hillary Clinton going to the black church back in when she was running for president back in 2016. I don't even like to mimic the way that she talked, but she did it. AOC, you have Jasmine Crockett out there changing their accents, the way that they talk based upon the people in the audience. It's off-putting. It just is off-putting. And he's trying to sound like a good old down-to-earth country boy Democrat. Folks want you to do two things. They want you to fix the darn economy, and they want you to fix the darn government. As though that, I remember back in the day, there was and I forget who the representative was. There was a representative, he lost his seat in 2010, I can tell you that. He was over in Western Indiana, around the Terre Haute area. And I remember talking about it on here. When people talked about this particular guy, this guy that was in the U.S. House of Representatives, and boy, his name will come to me, but I wasn't planning to share this today. But I remember people saying, when they talked about this individual, this Democrat, this guy mows his own yard. And that was like a big deal. This was the reason. He's one of us because he mows his own yard. He's out there on the lawnmower. He's pulling weeds out of the garden. He's got the weed eater, the trimmer, whatever you call it. He's got that out there. He's spraying some weed killer out there. This guy is just like us. And it is so mind-boggling to me because I would think if he's just like you, then why is he trying to grow the government, take away your liberty and freedom? The same mentality that you think he represents, this freedom-loving, just, rugged individualist who's out there mowing his own yard. You would think that he would want to give people, make sure that they have more of their liberty. But in reality, these folks want to grow the government. Anyway, I'll let him continue here. I can't interrupt him because I got to get this whole thing in.
It is time for an aspirational investment in housing that can bring down the cost of especially first-time home ownership. People can actually see that progress
of course,
all over the country. We ought to tie the federal dollars to speed. You've got to break ground, and you've got to do it quickly. Get through the overregulation and the NIMBYism. But I tell you what, people also think this government is broken. So Let's
pause there really quickly. Housing. I mean, if you want to know the way to make housing more expensive, get the government involved, right? Get the government involved. And actually, if you want to make housing more affordable, you've got to reduce, first of all, you've got to cut government spending if you're going to make anything else more affordable. This is, again, there have been inroads here when it comes to waste, fraud, and abuse, but government spending is still obviously a big thing. You could, of course, look at some legislation that prevents some of these giant corporations from buying up these homes. That you could look into something like that. But the idea that the government has the magical solve every problem card with housing if they just get more involved in it is ridiculous. I mean, you look at what they're doing in New York City, that's going to drive specifically the cost of, the availability of housing and eventually the cost of housing through the roof. They want to freeze rents. They want the government to take over these places and so forth. It's socialism, if not communism, my friends. It doesn't work. You got to get out of the way and let the free market respond. Maybe there's some things you can do to, like I said, prevent some of these big private equity firms from buying up all the housing. But anyway, he continues here with his point on government.
Constitutional amendment. It is time. It should outlaw partisan redistricting and enshrine part of the Voting Rights Act right there in the Constitution. It should create term limits for Congress and the Supreme Court. No more gaming those appointments. It should also overturn Citizens United and I think call for direct elections of the president and the vice president. That could actually make things work. A big idea that would, yes, change government, but in a way enshrined in the Constitution where people would know it's going to get better.
I didn't realize you.
So there you go. That's the abolition of the Electoral College, which I don't have a lot of time. I just don't have time to get into that. But they're out there calling for these radical ideas. I think there could be agreement. There is agreement on term limits for Congress. Term limits for the Supreme Court is something I would say is different. The Supreme Court is supposed to be apolitical. The Supreme Court, and by the way, if they interpret the law and they don't insert their own personal opinions, then the Supreme Court is not political. The justices on the Supreme Court are supposed to be the voices for the law and for the Constitution. Those are representatives, if you will, of the laws on the books and the Constitution, the founding document of this great nation. That's not open to political whim. They have a desire to try to find a way to get these conservative justices off the Supreme Court, and they are afraid of these justices because they actually interpret the law. They need activists on there that act as a fail stop here to make sure that if they don't pass, the Democrats don't pass their wacky ideas in Congress, that the Supreme Court would just implement them after the fact. Anyway, I'm out of time this segment, my friends. Got to take a time out. You're listening to Conservative Not Bitter Talk. I'm your host, Todd Huff. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Third and final segment of today's program. If you want to hear more about, say, the Electoral College, that's something that I'm going to write more about in the Inner Circle today. You can get that. I don't have time to get to that on this program today. The way that it's structured and formatted, I can't get as much into some of these issues as I would like, but the Inner Circle gives me some real estate. And so we'll talk today in the Inner Circle about the Electoral College, why it was put into place, why it's a good thing. We'll talk about those things. I just don't have time to talk about it this program today because I'm talking. I told you I had 3 things to get to, and I'm going to get to this third one here as the program comes to a conclusion in this third and final segment. But if you want to get the inner circle, it's totally free. Text the word join to 317-785-1030. Again, text join to 317-785-1030. Folks, let's face it, every dollar we spend is a vote for the kind of America we want to live in. That's why we launched Freedom Marketplace. It is a free directory of businesses that align with your conservative values. These businesses have made a promise: no support for leftist candidates, leftist causes, some of this nonsense Andy Beshear was talking about last segment. And if they break that promise, my friends, they are kicked out of the Freedom Marketplace. So if you're tired of funding the woke agenda, visit freedommarketplace.net. That's freedommarketplace.net. It's free, it's easy, and if I dare say so myself, it's the right thing to do. Liberty and business for all, my friends. Here we go. Headline here at Breitbart.com. You'll find this other places as well. WNBA admits security in Atlanta was wrong for asking mother and daughter to cover XXXY Athletics shirt. Both the WNBA and the Atlanta Dream criticized security at the Atlanta Gateway Center Arena for telling a mother and daughter to cover their XXXY Athletics shirt in support of Indiana Fever star Sophie Cunningham. We were made, this is a quote by the mother who attended the game here. We were made to cover up our XXXY shirts at this game. By the way, XX, of course, from a chromosome perspective, is what women have biologically, and men have XY chromosomes. The idea of these shirts is to say, look, there's men, there's women. Women should be in women's sports and not men. That's the idea. But she says they were made to cover these up at the game. They gave us, she says, T-shirts during overtime and told us we had to leave or cover our shirts up. This just happened. We were just sitting there. I didn't make any signs. I wanted to make signs, she says, but I didn't. I did nothing. After a massive pushback on social media, a WNBA spokesperson released a statement on Monday saying that the incident, quote, should not have happened. The WNBA is aware of interactions at last night's game in Atlanta in which fans were asked by league security to cover their shirts. A WNBA spokesperson said this should not have happened. The Atlanta Dream issued a statement as well denouncing the security's action. Anyway, that's what's happening. So you have this mother and daughter. They wear these T-shirts to the game. They're asked by security at the Atlanta Dream Stadium there in Atlanta to cover up the T-shirts or be forced out of the arena, be kicked out of the game. Not much of a choice, I would say. So they covered them up. I'd also read somewhere else, I don't know if it's confirmed or not, but I believe, and I think I heard it in their interview, I think they said there was another person who had a shirt that said trans kids belong in sports or something like that. I think it was similar to, maybe even identical to the T-shirt that was worn by Cheryl Reeve, the coach of the Minnesota Lynx WNBA team. She wore that shirt when Sophie and the Indiana Fever played them. A week or two ago? Anyway, I believe that person was told to basically do the same thing. Listen, this is a league. The league has caused all of this. They still refuse, in spite of their meeting amongst the brilliant among them, the best and brightest. They brought them into a special meeting to talk about supposedly a lot of things, but we know what they were talking about. They were talking about whether or not they could define what a woman is, and the best and brightest in the WNBA, which stands for Women's National Basketball Association, could not define what a woman is. And so now you have fans who are expressing their opinions. By the way, I don't think the fan who was wearing the T-shirt in support of the opposition should have had her message covered up either. But the left loves to do this. They love to shut up political opposition because, my friends, because they can't win the argument. So they will silence it. They will say you can't wear that or you got to go home. That's just not the way that this country should be run. Now, some people will say, listen, this is a WNBA team. They should not, it's their prerogative as to what rules they have. They have rules. This is a private sort of thing. You know, they set the rules. If you don't like it, don't go to the game. Well, I don't disagree with that, but I also say, first of all, I think you should side with free speech and the free exchange of ideas, number one. But number two, when you're using taxpayer dollars to fund your stadiums and so forth, this gets a little bit more complicated than it may sound at first glance. But I got to go. Just wanted to give you that update, my friends. Have a great day. SDG.